Alrighty, in this section, we are going to wrap up our discussion on module loaders and module bundlers by talking about JSPM. Now, as of this video, a couple days before the beginning of 2016, hello future people, JSPM is a very, very new and still much in development package manager slash module loader slash module bundler. So, yeah. Now, I think JSPM is really cool, personally, and I think in the next, I don't know, year, 2 years, 3 years, it's going to be something that could quite possibly disrupt the industry. To be honest, much in the same way Webpack and Browserify did a couple of years back. So I'm not going to go super in-depth into JSPM itself. Things might very much change in the future, but I want to give you guys an idea of it and kind of, I believe anyway, where the industry is going with module loading and dependency management. So put simply, JSPM is like if require.js, Browserify, NPM, and Bower all had a child. Like, it basically does all of that stuff. JSPM is a package manager. And now, what's great about JSPM is that it's a package manager that can load packages off of NPM and straight up GitHub, or just a Git repository. It's a module loader. As you can see right here, it will load AMD, CommonJS, and globals, but it'll also load ES6, which is interesting, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. And it's a bundler, so it is possible to take a JSPM project and bundle it up together. So the way JSPM is going to load your stuff during development is going to be very similar to how require.js works. So it's going to load your stuff in through the browser itself. Now what's interesting is JSPM, despite not only being a package manager, it also uses the System.js module loader, which uses the ES6 module loader in addition to loading AMD and CommonJS. Now, what's interesting about that is the ES6 module loader, and again, this must have been written before the powers that be decided to call ES6 ES 2015. What's interesting about that is this was a specification that was not approved for ES 2015, but is still up in the air for how browsers will one day have built-in module loading. And that's many, many, many years away as of this video. People aren't going to be, even once the specification happens and gets added to a ECMA specification or ECMA script specification, it's going to be quite a few years before we'll have native module support. But the nice thing about JSPM is it's very forward thinking in that it allows us to use these modules, these ES 2015 modules, and the future module loader right now. And that's really cool. There's a lot of great things about JSPM, and one of the reasons why I'm including it in this series. I really kind of want to see, or want people to see, kind of how the future is sort of going with this sort of thing. Even if I were to start a project today, I would still probably use Webpack. So these next couple of videos are just going to be a quick introduction to JSPM, kind of show you guys its philosophy, show you guys its potential drawbacks, and at least introduce you to where the future of JavaScript modules is going to be, either be it through JSPM or actual legitimate native support for them. Now, funny enough, we're not going to be talking about JSPM in this video. Instead, we're going to take a look at one of its components, and that is System.js. So System.js is the component in JSPM that's responsible for actual module loading. So System.js allows us to expose our modules as AMD, CommonJS, obviously UMD because it's both of those, as well as System.js. Now System.js is the API that was proposed for an actual native implementation. So we're going to take a look at System.js. We're not going to use System.js's ability to do transpiling. I'll talk about what that means and why it's important when we actually take a look at JSPM in the next video. But I do want to take a look at it. Now, System.js is, think of it as the runtime equivalent of require.js. Like I said, it supports loading a bunch of different formats. And it's based off of this guy, the ES6 module loader polyfill, which is the thing I've been talking about. The thing that actually polyfills in the system object, which one day, hopefully one day, according to the ES6 specification draft revision 27 section 15, is going to be available on our browsers to use. So let's go ahead and get started. There's not a whole lot to do here except show you guys kind of how you could use it today, basically. So let's move this over to the side, and I'm sitting here in an empty folder. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull down System.js, and I'm going to use Bower, which is kind of funny because JSPM replaces Bower, but we're going to use Bower to play with System.js in isolation of JSPM. So Bower install System.js, not SystemJS, System.js. I'm not going to worry about creating a Bower file, so I'm just going to pull this down directly. And then I'm going to open up code. So the first step is going to be creating an index.html file. Now, you will notice I am not creating a source or a public folder. I'm not differentiating between the two. And the reason why is System.js lives on the browser. It is not like Webpack or Browserify. It does not do module resolution through the file system. It's more like require.js. So all of our components, including System.js itself, has to be served out by a web server. You have to be able to access it from the browser. So I'm not worrying about making a public folder. So let's just go ahead and get started. We'll put in our doc type, like all good web developers do. We'll open up our HTML head plus body. Isn't that a shampoo? I think it's a shampoo. Anyway, and then for our body, we'll go ahead and import in System.js. So I'm going to open up a script tag. It's not how you spell script. With a source attribute of Bower components / System.js / dist / System.js. And forgive me if I make any mistakes. I am using System.js directly isn't something that you'll often do. If you want to use System.js, you should use JSPM, which does all this awesome stuff for us. Anyway, so we'll pull that in, and then I'll go ahead and I'll start a web server inside of this directory so we can play around with it. So I'll start CMD. If you guys are on Unix platforms, just start another terminal, and we'll do HTTP server. So now that's all being served out. And then let's bring over my Chrome window, and we do indeed see that System.js is being loaded into the browser, as is evident right there. All right, so everything's happy, but we're not currently doing anything useful. So let's go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do here is System.js does a very similar thing to require.js, in that there are kind of two steps that you have to go through. The first step is configuration, and the second step is loading in your entry point module. So let's go ahead and configure our System.js. I'm going to say system.config, similar to require.config, open an object, and we're going to do base URL. Now this gets me every time, so we'll do base URL scripts. This gets me every time. Base URL, the URL is capitalized, capital R, capital L. Apparently there is no consensus in the JavaScript community as to if you should capitalize all of those letters or not. So if you do not provide this, things won't work correctly. So make sure you capitalize that. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. And then let's import something. I'm going to say system.import, and I'm going to say application.js. So, I mean, I don't really know what to do for this example. I'm just going to go ahead and throw in a scripts folder. Make sure it's in our base directory, of course. And I'll throw in different kinds of modules we can use here. Let's throw in our application.js, and let's say application.js is AMD. So we're going to say define, and we're going to say lib.js, then we're going to say function lib, lib, and then we're going to say lib.func. All right, so simple AMD style module. And then I'll create another file called lib.js, which will simply say exports.func equals function console log hello world. All right, so we have a application.js, which is an AMD module. And then on the left-hand side, we have lib.js, which is a common JS module. And so if we pull this up, hit F5, we see hello world. So the important thing is that System.js is indeed actually working with our dependencies correctly. It's loading in a AMD module and a CommonJS module. And as you can imagine, it'll pull in a UMD module just fine as well. But let's make this a little bit more interesting. I'm going to add another script, and I'm going to call it a, let's just call it an ES2015.js. So ES2015.js, I'm going to use a new module format that we only talked about briefly in an earlier video, and that's the SystemJS module format. This is, again, the module format that's been proposed by the ECMA committee to be the official JavaScript module format, or not so much as far as the syntax goes, because in the future, obviously, we'll have ES2015 module syntax, but insofar as the functionality goes. And this is what they came up with. We start off, it's very similar to AMD. It's much more similar to AMD than it is CommonJS. We start off with system.register. And then we pass in an array of dependencies. And let's pass in lib.js as a dependency. And then we pass in a function that takes in a couple parameters. In this case, we'll just grab export. Now, there's two steps with this. Now, this two-stage sort of initialization is how the System.js specification deals with cyclic dependencies. So let's go ahead and say var lib, and then we return an object, and that object will have a property called setters. The setters will be an array, and it'll be an array of functions that take in our dependencies. So our first dependency is lib. So I'll take in a dependency underscore lib, and I'll simply say lib equals underscore lib. So this is a binding. We're dynamically binding to this dependency. And then after setters, we pass an execute. And execute is a function that can now use lib. So I can now say console log from ES2015, well, not really, because this is still ES5 code, but whatever. And we can invoke lib.func. Notice how I don't get any code completion. So code apparently doesn't support this module format, nor really should it. This module format is something that's sort of internal to how this kind of works behind the scenes. You should never really use this module format directly, because it's going to be something that you either transpile to or gets processed directly from ES2015 import statements. But anyway, we can also export stuff by invoking that export function up there that we acquired via this parameter. And I can export, let's export ble as a function. And the function will just say console log whoa, because I'm not creative. And that's it. That's how you import, and that's how you export. So you import in 3 stages. You import by declaring it in this array. Then you declare a function that, or a variable that you'll be able to access. Then you declare a setter function, which is invoked once this module is loaded, and that sets that variable up there. And then in your execute function, once all your things are properly imported, your execute function will execute, and it'll have access to all this stuff. So again, this is a really clever way of handling circular dependencies, because all the setters will get invoked, and your or they will get re-invoked depending on at what time things get exported or imported. It's fairly clever, but again, you're generally not going to write this code directly. But anyway, let's jump back to application.js and let's import it. So I'm going to add this. I'm going to add ./ES2015, and then I'll do /ES2015, and I'll just console log it out for now. ES2015. And then coming back to our example page, of course, I forgot the .js there. We now have from ES2015 hello world. So you see that the ES2015 code executed, and then executed code on lib. And then our exports include ble. So in fact, I can come back in here in my application and do ES2015.ble, which is this export that was made right here. Come back here, refresh, and I get whoa. All right, well, that's really it. I mean, generally speaking, if you're going to be writing modules by hand, you're generally going to choose between CommonJS or AMD, or you're going to use UMD, which you'll generally have that pre-compiled using a tool. or whatever, you generally will not be using the syntax. As you can see, it's very verbose, but it's also very functional. And this is exactly what's going on behind the scenes when we use a proper System.js module loader. And once this is supported natively by browsers, this is going to be what it's doing. But for now, we just have this format. And the great thing about it, though, is the transpiler we've been using, Babel, and even TypeScript support outputting to the System.js format, as you saw earlier in an earlier video. But yeah, I just wanted to show you guys System.js, how really, really straightforward it is, and just point out that this is just one aspect of JSPM. This is just the module loader. And again, it'll load anything you throw at it, which is cool, but it's not as cool as when you combine it with JSPM. And I think that's what we're going to do in the next video, and we'll see you guys then.